go ahead and get us started. Why don't you all, if you wouldn't mind, join me here in Manner of Friends with a moment of shared silence. Thank you so much. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Anna Wyeth. I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement here at Sidwell Friends. Thank you for being with us this evening for this Conversation with Friends event. Before we get started, I just have a couple quick housekeeping items. I really want to encourage everyone to keep your video on if you feel comfortable doing so. It really helps us feel that full participation of everyone who has joined. And I also want to encourage you to change your Zoom name to include your full name and however you're connected to the school. So for alums, add your class year in. If you are a parent of an alum or a grandparent, a current parent, perhaps a current or former faculty or staff member, you can just think of it like your virtual name tag. It shows us who's here tonight. And if you've never changed your name on Zoom before, you can do so by hovering over your own video and clicking on those three dots, and you should see the option to rename. I'll ask everybody to just keep yourselves on mute, just simply to minimize disruptions. And we'll save asking questions for the dedicated Q&A portion later in the evening. So throughout tonight, if you have questions, please feel free to send them via the chat to me, Anna Wyeth. And we're happy to ask your question on your behalf when we get to the Q&A, or if you'd like to ask it yourself, just let us know when you share your question, and then we'll let you know when it's your turn to ask it. And now finally, to get to the reason you're all here tonight, I'm so excited to introduce our featured speakers. John Marshall, Dr. John Marshall, received his training at Duke University and the University of Louisville, and then Georgetown University. He's an internationally recognized expert in new drug development for GI cancer, and has become an outspoken advocate for GI cancer patients and the importance of clinical research participation. In 2009, he established the Otto J. Rusch Center for the Cure of GI Cancers, an organization solely focused on improving the lives of GI cancer patients through innovative research, personalized medicine, and focused advocacy. And in 2021, he and his wife, Liza Marshall, published their first book called Off Our Chests, which of course is what we are here tonight to talk about, exploring their world of cancer medicine and the impact of a cancer diagnosis on patients, caregivers, and cancer professionals. Here with John tonight, his wife, Liza Marshall, who is a retired communications attorney and a graduate of Duke University and the University of Virginia School of Law. She left practice in 2005 to channel her skills to cancer support organizations and her family. She helped found Hope Connections for Cancer Support in Bethesda, Maryland. And in 2006, at the age of 43, Liza was diagnosed with the most deadly form of breast cancer, triple negative. She continues to be an active volunteer at Hope Connections, her church, and her community. And of course, John and Liza are parents of a wonderful alumna from the class of 2014, Emma. Leading our conversation tonight is Ben Weinberg, class of 2003. Dr. Ben Weinberg is an associate professor of medicine in the Division of Hematology and Oncology at Georgetown University, specializing in gastrointestinal oncology and sarcoma. And specifically, his work is focused on developing new therapies for colorectal and pancreatic cancers by translating research from animal models into early phase clinical trials in humans, as well as focusing on the rise of incidence of colon and rectal cancers in younger patients. Throughout his medical career, Ben has worked exhaustively to make sure that patients are heard and that they receive the highest quality of care. His training as a resident and fellow at Georgetown leads him in the pursuit of cura personalis, or care for the whole person. And he brings this mindset every day into the clinic and all his work with his patients. Ben is married to a fellow Sidwell Friends classmate, Anna Weinberg, class of 2003 as well, and they live in Arlington with their two young children, Jake and Charlotte. And so now, truly without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ben to get us started.
Well, thank you, Anna, for that great introduction and for putting this all together, and the whole staff at Sidwell for supporting this series. It's really my pleasure to be a part of this, and For those of you who don't know, John is also my boss. So if I ask, the wrong question, it's like I don't need to show up for work tomorrow kind of thing. So, but really, this is really a pleasure, and I'm really impressed at the turnout and how you all, get people to do another Zoom meeting late in the day, which I know, some of us get zoomed out. But, this is really a conversation amongst friends and focusing on the book Off Our Chest, which if I pulled the right way, my Zoom background doesn't destroy. I'm actually sitting on the top of Key Bridge while also being in my basement. So for those of you who don't know, John took a sabbatical to write this book and got to work in Oxford. And the two of them wrote kind of alternating chapters for those of you who haven't read the book. So my first question really is, beyond getting the opportunity to do a sabbatical in Oxford, why did you write this book, and really, what does it mean to you? What came out of it?
I'll start with the first one, and maybe you can. We'll fight it out in a minute. But so we originally, a friend of ours. Well, let me back up. There was an article written about us in the Arlington Magazine in 2013, and a friend of ours who's a writer had suggested that it would be a good idea, maybe, for us to try writing a book about our experience, with the recognizing that not only had John been, John was a gastrointestinal oncologist, but John had sort of made a career out of expressing his resentment for the great success, both in fundraising and advocacy, of the whole breast cancer, what we tend to refer to as the sort of breast cancer machine. And the fact that, everything turns pink in October. I mean, you all know when Breast Cancer Awareness Month is coming. I am sure you probably don't know when Gastrointestinal Cancer Month is, or Colon Cancer Month.
There isn't one.
There is one, but it gets a lot less press. So anyway, there was this immediate tension there. And so anyway, we sort of made a couple false starts, and then we'll talk a little bit later perhaps about, in some ways, a sort of good thing and also a bad thing was that John, because of my cancer, began to develop some burnout, and which pushed him then to try to do the sabbatical. And the sabbatical then allowed us to have the time and space really to work on this book.
Yeah, my guess is, of the people on this call, about 3/4 of you have written at least one book yourself. So you know that this is not an easy undertaking. We first thought we could just sort of do it on long flights to California or something, and that turned out not possible. We really needed to go off and do this. And so it was one of the goals of the sabbatical, was to try and write this story. Maybe not for anybody else, but honestly, for me, it was really therapy. It was maybe my moment of silence with myself, to sit down and kind of write out what I was feeling, what I was thinking at the time. And of course, the gift of time allowed me to get there. So it was really a treat and an honor to get the window to do this. So, and in the end, I think it was the therapy I needed, for sure.
And again, for those of you who haven't read the book, there's sort of parallel chapters, right? So with the kind of passage of time, some of these memories seem to be not pristine, for lack of a better word. There seems to be some gray. Can you talk about how, because you wrote these chapters separately and then kind of came together, places where your memories didn't coincide, or where there's still a lot of disagreement in terms of like what actually took place?
I'll go first. I as you know, Ben, I can't even remember from our meeting this morning we had together at 8 o'clock. So I gave up from the start, given that this was 15 years later, and really used it as a time of reflection. And there were times I was nervous, because I refer to very specific people and things and times, and did my best to kind of go back and cross-check that. But we did put a little thing in the front that says we might not have gotten this right, or our own memory. It was more about what I felt. But Liza had a cheat sheet. She had her chart and some notes that I ended up taking. And so Liza was, as always in our lives, she was the rudder in all of this, to say, well, this is really what happened, and this is my memory. So when you read it, or if you get a chance to read it, her part's correct and my part's probably not. Although I will defend to the end. I think my part's correct.
Yeah. Well, I actually disagree. I mean, I think that we did have several things that we remembered differently, and there were a lot of things we did remember differently. We only have a few of them in the book, but actually in retrospect, I think his are actually correct and mine are wrong. But maybe that's just because I've, drunk his Kool-Aid all these years. I think everything he says is right. So.
Yeah. No, she doesn't. That's, all you married people know that that's not true. Yeah, so it was an interesting process, because then once we'd written it, we hadn't shown each other what we had written. So it had gotten about a few months into the sabbatical, and we'd each gone to our separate places to write. And we had a helper who may be on the call tonight, Marianne Segedy-Mazak, is a great writer and great editor and knows us very well, and is the one who told us we had to write the book. Well, we would send her like our paper. So all you teachers on there, we would send her our chapters, but not to the other, mine to her, Liza's to hers, but not, we didn't see the others. And Liza's would come back with A+, big smiley face on it. And mine would come back just shrapnel red. I mean, it was just, this is wrong. You can't say that. This has got to go. So anyway, I kept getting C- on my essays, and she kept getting A+. So that sort of pissed me off a little bit.
And looking back at, you chronicle the whole sort of journey from diagnosis through treatment, through sort of aftermath, and then the burnout piece, which we'll get to more. What do you think each of you was sort of the hardest part in that experience, aside from the existential, and the unknowns and the uncertainty? What was the hardest part, either physically or mentally, through that process?
Yeah, well, I think the remembering was, not as you say, not so much the emotional piece of remembering, but as we went into this, I was very afraid I wasn't going to be able to remember anything. You just sort of don't know what your brain has done with facts like that and experiences like that. And as John says, I did have, fortunately, some documents that sort of helped me at least to develop a timeline. And then I was surprised at how much really came back. So, I think the other hard piece, and I don't mean to be taking this from you, but I think really for us, it was this, we both wrote a lot of things, some, again, most of which are in the book, but some of which are not, but that were really revealing to the other one. And there were a lot of things that we had thought at the time and even in subsequent years and had never said to each other. And, I think whenever, a couple goes through something that is a somewhat traumatic experience, there is a lot of that, because there are a lot of things that either you just don't want to say out loud personally, or you're worried about the reaction that you're going to get. And so those, we kind of joke, but there were about 3 days. We handed off at the beginning of November, what each one of us had written to the other one. And then there were sort of 3 days of working through that. And gosh, did you really think that? Or, that's what you think of me, or, and that kind of stuff. But which in the end probably was therapeutic, but we made it, we're still married. Yeah. But that was hard, I think, hard for both of us.
Yeah, from the process. Yeah, Ben, because you have to, unfortunately for you, live with me a lot. But I have. I
have to live with you.
Oh, yeah, you do too. But I have just a lot to say. No, I
haven't had that experience at all.
Part of me was like, I just wanted to write down everything I ever thought in my life as a reaction to this, and whether it was the cost of healthcare or managing side effects, or, the people we take care of day in and day out, and what it feels like to be them. And so it really brought up all of those things in me. And it is why I ended up probably writing I know I wrote way too much than what we needed, but it just a lot had to pour out. And I think, so in that sense, the time of writing, I still think may have been the best time of my whole life, and maybe our whole lives together. It was really special. You said we were in Oxford. We were in a small flat in a Jesuit college in Oxford, where no car, a little refrigerator, and we walked every day and had beer every day and coffee before that, and it was met some sheep. It was really for all of us Washingtonians and everybody around the country who are just so busy and nonstop pre-pandemic, it was really like just putting the pause button on and getting a chance to stop. So if you ever get a chance to do that, do it.
It trained us well for the pandemic too. We already knew about, quiet and all that.
Yeah, and yeah, like you said, you wrote a lot, and I think, Liza, you wrote less, and so somewhere in the middle, the word count got equal. But my question was actually more pointed at your experience, not writing the book per se, but of the diagnosis and the treatment. What do you think was sort of the hardest looking back? Again, not just the existential and the uncertainty, but going through it all.
Well, when I first saw her, Liza's breast dimpled the way it was, and I thought she was dead. I mean, that moment of, I thought she was dead, right? That was it, it's what it looked like. It was really hard for me to ever shake that. So it was sort of partitioning that off and keeping the day job going and managing helping to manage the house and the kids and all of those things. So honestly, I just put myself in an emotional zone where that had no emotion, let's put it that way. That just sort of, I was going to have to manage this situation, and any personal feelings were going to have to be put off to later. So I think when I think back, having reflected, that may have been the hardest. I mean, we were lucky. Liza got her treatment at Georgetown, so it was like home for me. Home base for me. And after giving up the privacy part of that, there were so many advantages to that for us that we were totally spoiled. So from that end, Liza, as usual, made it easier on me, I think, than what she was going through.
Yeah, and I would say, the hardest for me, I think, is, there's several things that were hard, but that stick out as particularly difficult. But I think, going from, and again, I knew a fair bit about cancer, but walking from the world of you're going along and everything's fine, and all of a sudden, you're diagnosed with cancer, and you're thrown into this world you don't really understand. As I say, I at least knew what the clinic looked like, and I knew what the doctors looked like already, but it was still, it was language I didn't understand. Here are some clinical trials you should consider. Again, I knew actually what a clinical, how clinical trials worked more than most people, but still, I did not know what anybody was talking about. I had no idea how to choose which one I should be on, if I should be on one at all. So I think, just that onslaught of information in a lingo that really most people don't understand. And no matter how hard I think doctors and oncologists in particular try to convey it in language that the layperson can understand, I'm not sure the layperson really can understand it. And so, I kind of refer to one point in the book that there's, at the end of my chart, or by the end of my notes for one day, my doctor says, that I had said that I understood. Well, she said that because she's required to put that she explained the clinical trial to me, and I said I understood, because that's, I'm a lawyer. Those things are, lawyers make those things happen, right? But I didn't really understand. I understood as much as I could, and but it was it's stark to me, that language of that I said I understood, and what I remember is I had no idea what anybody was saying to me.
Yeah, Ben, you kind of made the question unfair though, because you took out the other than the loss of control, other than the unknown. That's the
easy answer. That's the obvious.
It's so striking. Because it's very hard to get back in control. So you just basically have to start to learn to live in that sort of free fall, that it takes a long time to feel the ground underneath you again. And for people who are control freaks,
that's not us, of course.
No, you people. That's really what I think for me was hard to get. And I'll echo what Liza was saying. She does not like to not understand, and yet at some level you've got to give that up. You've just got to concede it, because there's no way you can really ultimately understand, as you point out in the book.
But what you may not realize, now that we all use electronic medical records, is that everything's a template. So, asked and understood all questions is like you're privileged and confidential. It's like printed on each page, but you poignantly describe in the book this scene where relatively early on in your diagnosis, you're, I believe, on the gurney with 3 docs above you, including John, and you're hashing out the treatment plan, and there's jargon, mumbo jumbo thrown back and forth for like minutes, and then they kind of turn to you and say like, clear as mud, like, so, I mean, I could, I think in a way you were almost at a unique disadvantage because you had him in the room, do you think? And did you process that at the time? I guess that could be kind of a disconnect.
Yeah, well, I don't know that I processed that particularly at the time. I mean, there were certainly things that I thought at the time that were, my main concern about John was that he was going to know what was going on with me, and that was bad, and I wasn't going to know, and he wasn't going to tell me. I mean, I didn't really want him to tell me, but at the same time, there was just sort of this cloud, I think, hovering over us, that there was this information up there that, was only raining on one of us, so to speak. But so I think that was more, but I mean, it was, yes, I think in that instance particularly, because I think literally everybody forgot it was in the room as they were hashing this out. And normally the patient wouldn't be in the room. I mean, normally you would, Dr. Willie would have sent me home, and then, whoever would have sat around talking about, what treatment I ought to have. But so it was a privilege in some senses to be there, but it was also just sort of mind-boggling and caused me to shut down a little bit, I think, too.
Yeah, it was quite a scene. I remember it vividly because we were up here and she's down there, and we just started talking up here, literally up there, and she's just looking at us like, I don't know what's going on. But we not to blow any secrets of the book, but I got burned early on because I'm the one who told her she had cancer. Her pathology report got incorrectly forwarded to me. And so we debate a little bit about the details of this in the book, but how it happened. But I got her pathology report while we were on the phone together, just Monday morning check-in, and said, you have cancer. So that was really, I hate giving people bad news. I mean, it's what we do for a living in oncology, or it's part of what we do for a living. But it's my least favorite part of the job. And here I had to start our journey by telling her that because I couldn't not say it, came into my face, and I just basically said it. So I think that did affect me in the long run, because then I really didn't do anything, like most, I didn't go into her chart. I didn't go to tumor board, even though I was invited. I didn't dig into the clinical trial like most caregivers would do. I just stood on the sideline and trusted the team that they were just going to take care of her. And as I said, the team also took care of me.
And yeah, that leads me to what I was going to ask next, which is I'm sort of fascinated, how folks choose what information they're going to get, and nowadays, what information, how they're going to get. That's a whole separate topic. But then, how we act on that information. I mean, I think we both have patients. I think we can think of the same mutual patient who, for lack of a better word, just kind of buries their head in the sand, right? They don't want to know anything about what's going on, right? Somebody else is going to handle the consents and everything else. But for some people, it really works, and they really just, they do what they're told, but they're not inquisitive, and they really don't want to know. And that's like one end of the spectrum. And then there's, the hyper intellectualized patient who's throwing out all the clinical trials and doing research, between their job and things like that. And I think most people sort of fall kind of somewhere in the middle, but I'm almost floored that, you said that when someone was even giving a talk on triple negative breast cancer, you left the room. You had no interest in learning more about it, or, and Google was around then, I guess it was, Googling it, but also the clinical trials piece, which is an interesting one. And I don't know, maybe you can both talk about what you kind of understood about clinical trials, how you chose to enroll in a clinical trial. And then on the flip side, why you weren't interested in researching more clinical trials, knowing, what you know.
Yeah, sure. So why I enrolled on a clinical trial is sort of, I think, twofold. One is, John ran clinical trials at Georgetown. He'd been talking about clinical trials forever and how important they were. And, the statistics about, I've always found this very jarring that, childhood cancers now are 97% cured because every parent in the world, or at least in America, I mean, whatever, in the research world, put their child on a clinical trial. And so the advances were made very quickly. And I think the AIDS epidemic also bore that out, that, you know, when that people were desperate enough that they got on clinical trials and, you know, and advanced the science very, very quickly. Whereas adult cancers, the science continues to advance really pretty slowly, and only 3% of patients enroll on clinical trials. And so you know, with those statistics in mind, it seemed like it was the right thing to do. And I also, you know, I think also part of being married to a doctor, you know, I've been sort of part of medical education. I mean, John went to medical school right after we got married. So, you know, I have been very involved in that. I typed up lectures. And so there is a whole community aspect to me that I think is really important. And I also understood, which I think is, I think one of the errors that a lot of people make or misapprehensions is that if you go on a clinical trial, you're getting something completely different. And, you know, it might not be as good as what you would get if you didn't go on a clinical trial. And I did understand that no matter what, I was going to get the standard of care. There would be things added to that, or they might be altered in a way, but I wasn't risking my chances of a treatment, or getting less good of a treatment. That's not very articulately said, but by going on a clinical trial. So I think those were some of the factors.
This was a relatively new. I mean, I knew enough about this cancer to know it was new. It's a new subset of breast cancer, and the research had not really moved directly into that kind of cancer much yet. And so the study Liza went on was not particular to her subset of cancer. It was just more advanced breast cancers were eligible, any of them. We were afraid, and the trial involved doing something to the standard care. Every arm was a weird trial because all of the arms were sort of research arms. There was no true standard of care arm in the trial you went on, and some modification of the current standard. When we look back, you go on 3 clinical trials, 2 of which were therapeutic trials, right? And meaning treatments that were intended to improve the standard of care, and neither of them was positive. So we were 0 for 2. The one we turned down was the positive trial. So I'm not sure we were good bettors in the first place, right? So
don't take our
which
advice.
one? You want that one? You want that one?
Well, on the flip side, you're still here, so it's still works for you.
Yeah,
that's
so
totally.
the individual outcome, and this is what's always interesting, is the individual outcome is not reflected in the New England Journal. What happened to one person versus another, and what actually cured Liza, we will never know. Lots of things happened to her, and again, it's you know this about me too. We try never to open studies and suggest studies that we would not do ourselves. It's just the way I judge these things. And the team that we were working, our team, our breast cancer team there said this is one they would back. And we did look at other trials, and we did shop around for docs a little bit, just to make sure, because of the awkwardness of our situation. But anyway, we did a little shopping, but not nearly as much as a lot of people did.
Well, I can't imagine. I mean, I'm thankful nobody told me about more trials. I can't imagine trying to figure. I think I was only really between 2, one at Fairfax and one at Georgetown, and the idea of, just trying to understand those, and the idea of having 5 or 10 with, again, drug names you don't know, side effects you don't understand. I very much admire anybody who can distill that information and make a choice, because I think it's really hard.
But this is a little corny, I'll add, is that we do talk a bunch about in the book about our own personal faith. And while this sounds a little sacrilegious, I don't mean it that way. I mean it the opposite. I do believe in the randomization gods. It is a random event which arm you get assigned to as a patient or one of our patients. And there's just something about it that, patients are disappointed when they get like the standard arm and not the research arm. But there's a lot when a patient has that happen and is disappointed, I'm like, you don't know that yet. There are reasons for things, and let's just see how this plays out. So,
well, also, if we knew that the experimental arm was better, we wouldn't need to do the trial.
Right.
And the experimental arm, like you saw, is often more toxic in a lot of sense, and that's almost to be expected, right? So going back to what cured you, so for those who don't read the book, surgery, radiation, and a boatload of chemotherapy. And again, the arm you,
And
what's that?
bisphosphonates for 3 years.
And yeah, I was going to, yeah. But in the arm you were on, you got more chemo than you otherwise would have. And you go through all of this with, hard chemo. And then because of basically a podcast you did before there were podcasts, an old colleague sends you which the emails we send to each other are like, 3-word emails. He suggests a chemotherapy that you have not received, even though you've received basically every other chemotherapy to date. And that one small email from like talk about the randomization gods, sort of like the email gods, that was enough for you to decide to, one, disenroll from the trial, right? And then get this other chemo that had even less evidence than the chemos you were already on. So I don't know if you can both talk about that sort of bizarre process and kind of what led to that.
Well, when you put it that way, it does sound bizarre.
It sounds pretty stupid, doesn't it?
Seriously, when you said that, I was like, I don't really know.
They might take back endless acceptance if we tell them how stupid we are.
I mean, that really is a hard question to answer. I mean, Mark Lippman knew Sandra Bullock. I mean, why wouldn't you take advice from him, right?
I helped him use the EMR today, so I'm in his good graces. So.
Yeah. He really, particularly as he had, his time at Georgetown, he really turned Lombardi around in many ways and made breast cancer such a huge thing. And he is really smart. I mean, just ask him, excuse me if he's on this, but he would probably admit that he does that. I just said yes. I mean, that's not completely true. I'm sure I thought about it for a little while, but I didn't know any better. I mean, I had no idea. I mean, what he said was, or what the data that seemed significant was that a platinum drug, platinums were showing evidence of success in metastatic triple negative breast cancer. And while I did not have metastatic cancer, I sort of thought, well, if it's working against triple negative breast cancer in one form, why, and somebody's willing to give it to me, then what the heck, let's try it. Yeah,
I thought she had metastatic triple negative breast cancer. I mean, the stage that she had, you saw her path report in the book. It's lymphangitic ducts just plugged with tumor. They couldn't really find the primary. She had dimpling and some bunch of lymph nodes positive. That's in my way of thinking, that was a very high probability that she in fact did have metastatic disease. So, I'd watched a lot of women in that setting die from that disease in a very quick order. And so, some of it is just reaction to the fear of, it made sense. Somebody was willing to, we had to talk our doctors into accepting this decision. Despite my being their boss, I tried not to do that. But, it was when the gun's pointed at you, you try and get out of the way. And that, for me, that's really what this was, is that it was one of those, would I have regretted not having done it? And again, I didn't get any of it, right? So it all went in this woman over here. But so I was supportive of that. And it wasn't, maybe you should think about it, is your wife needs this. And Mark and I have always sort of shared that, half crazy, skip a few step logic in cancer medicine. And so I did see this as coming from above a bit.
It just goes to, all of you non-docs out there, that we do crazy stuff sometimes for better reasons than others. And the other thing that I really learned from the book, I think most of what I learned was from the Liza chapters, just because I've heard the John chapters ad nauseum, is that, you had a close sort of school mom acquaintance who died of very similar cancer, very right before this all happened. So it made everything very clear. It wasn't like an abstract, like, oh, I might die of this. It's like, oh, we just had this friend who got into trouble and died fairly quickly from similar disease. The thing I wanted to go back to from the beginning, when you said, you walled yourself off and it's like, you have to keep the job and keep making the money and keep the health insurance. And that's a very real thing that I think a lot of us who don't, question our health insurance and things, or that we have jobs, that we worry about. But, a lot of our patients are, their first question is like, when can I get back to work? Like, yeah, I have to do all this chemo and stuff, but like, I need to put food on the table. I need to keep that job, to keep the health insurance, et cetera. Going through this, can you contemplate what things had been like if, John wasn't working, or, you were on your own, or, and you were already sort of retired from your job, what things could have been like differently had that been the case?
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely almost every single day, thanked my lucky stars. I mean, I was very, very lucky, and universal health care wasn't something we discussed in those days that much, but it's obviously become much more of a policy issue, and it seems like a no-brainer to me. I mean, and that's not to say I understand it costs money, and I understand it's not that simple, but the idea that somebody's health is tied to whether or not they or somebody who is legally connected to them has a job, to me is just doesn't make sense. And I think that, as I say, it was really stark for me. And even now I'm very I have a history of breast cancer, and I'm reliant on John being healthy enough to have a job, because again, this is, post Obamacare. Yes, it's easier for me to get a health insurance policy, but there were quite a few years there in which, I didn't know that I was even insurable, or wasn't, it was going to cost me $3,000 a month or something like that. And it's honestly pretty frightening, I think. And that's with being somebody who does, as they say, I do have all these things, and I have resources, but there are zillions of people out there who don't have any of the things we had. I mean, the knowledge, the support community, a good health insurance, or even a half good health insurance plan, financial resources, good food. I mean, the list goes on, right? Talking about trying to maintain, to go through cancer treatment while you have a job. I mean, I also didn't have to do that. And I don't know how people even do that, honestly. I mean, partly, not only because of because the treatment's hard, but honestly, it's just a full-time job. I mean, I went to doctors, it felt like all day long, every day for this, that, and I mean, some of the side effect would come up, well, you need to go see a specialist about that, go see your gastroenterologist, go see your eye doctor. And so anyway, as I say, I think we have a long way to go, not only with cancer treatment, but with healthcare in general in this country, to make it something that people have access to and also are able to manage their health.
Well, and just how complex it is,
Yeah.
too, an appreciation of what it is that you and I do all day, every day behind the scenes, to be ready for showtime, whenever showtime is. It's really, it really does take the village on our side, on the white coat side, to bring cancer care or any kind of complex medical care to the table. And it really does take the village on the patient side to deliver that patient on time and in good enough shape to get it. And when we have patients who are single, maybe just moved to town, or a family lives somewhere else, or they are the sole breadwinner, you all of a sudden have to start making medical decisions differently with that patient, because they're not going to be able to pull off what you first thought you were going to do. So, we don't really have an appreciation in this country for those kinds of same day game time decisions that you and I make for people based on their social situation, based on what a health insurance will cover or not cover. And it's because it's not the same. And so that really, Liza's experience, our experience with that, opened my eyes to even more, was what we call the ripple effect, the impact of, there are two people in the room and me as the doc, and you tell them something, that information now goes out to people all around. If in the best situation, lots of people know what went on in that room and can be there to support that patient.
And different people get different versions of what happened in the room, and that can be hard to disseminate. And for those of you who have questions, please send them to Anna. She's curating the questions. And along those lines, I think Americans, we take for granted a lot of things, and one of them is cancer care, right? But I know you have a big interest in global oncology. What is cancer care like? If you were in a developing country, let's say, we're always taught, cancer care is basically a luxury, right? Maybe you have a surgeon, right? So I don't know if you've thought about that and what the story would play out in a different environment.
Yeah, I mean, you need all sorts of ologists, right? And you need a CAT scanner, and you need, people who can manage and administer drugs. Part of during the sabbatical, I did get to travel. We traveled around the world a lot and went and visited a bunch of different cancer centers around the world of different ilks. And I was in Ho Chi Minh City, where you basically queued up. You got a little stool, a red stool. Everybody got one, and you queued up. And I talked to the oncologist, and the oncologist's job was to see everybody in the queue that day. And I'm like, well, how many is that? It was like 120 patients that oncologist had to see. And then the infusion room had 80 chairs, one back, right next to each other. And in the morning, they would line up 80, treat those, and then 4 nurses treated those 80 patients. And then the afternoon was another setting. And of course, progress notes were not very long, but the luxury world of healthcare and cancer care in particular is something that you must recognize is not in keeping with what you're paying, right? So we're going into debt around our healthcare. I'm sure this audience knows that, but in cancer care, because of its scariness, because of its new innovations all the time, there are very few insurance regulations on U.S. Cancer care. We get away with a lot more than you might think. $20,000 drugs a month is standard in our world. So we're going to have to figure out how we take care of each other on a global front, for sure.
And we alluded earlier to burnout, and that was a reason why you did a lot of this, right? So I don't know if you can talk about what your personal experience was, how you burnt out, how you repaired yourself, or work in progress. I don't know.
We're still working on it, yeah. So, after our experience and being the administrator, clinical head of a cancer center, it really seemed to me that we could be doing a better job for all of our patients, and our experience gave me some thoughts on how to do that. So I started working with the administration of at Georgetown and MedStar to try and put in some new positions. The nurse navigators are a result of that, and dividing us up into disease teams and things. And I certainly didn't get everything that was in my wish, but then it was like we got so spoiled by our doctors because they were our friends, right? And I just felt so cool to have. It was so comforting to have that kind of access that I thought, well, don't we owe that to all our patients? Don't we owe that kind of access and immediacy? And so early on in the email days, I would it was on my business card, and I would give my business card to patients, and mostly they didn't use it, but every now and then they would. And it was very respectful how, they only used it at like DEFCON 4.5. Otherwise they wouldn't call. One of my favorite stories that I think made the cutting room floor was a patient who I don't check my emails on like Saturday night. I don't check them then. So this patient had sent an email on Saturday during the day to me that I didn't see until like Sunday afternoon. And it described this terrible medical situation. And it was really bad. It sounded horrible. And at the end, the patient says, I think I might be dying, right? Send. That's what I got. So, so I opened it the next day, and we're in the kitchen, and I laughed to Liza, I said, you can't believe this. So what I did was I wrote back and said, did you die? Send. So I was either going to get a smile or no one was ever going to answer. But it became too close. It became too immediate. I would wake up worrying about what a scan showed. I would go to bed, checking my email. How did they do overnight? Vice versa. And it just started to weigh on me. And our patients are getting too young, and a high percentage were dying. And so trying to deliver that level of attention and care, knowing what it feels like to wait on a result, right? Knowing how it feels to be out there not knowing, and trying to close that gap, I realized I just couldn't do it. So eventually I just had to figure out, and thank you to Dr. Ben Weinberg, who made the sabbatical possible. Because without his willingness, I did give it as an option, although he may not have felt it that way, but he ended up seeing lots of my patients while I was away.
It was like a Ho Chi Minh City kind of experience.
But I'm forever grateful. So I owe Ben a lot for that really best time of our lives. So one more time, Dr. Weinberg, thank you very much.
Okay, I'm glad we got a book out of it.
Got a book out of it.
I know, you would have been mad if we come back with nothing, wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, we got questions. Anna, you want to try?
Sure. So we got a couple of questions that I think are a little similar. One asking about, and this is from someone who's going through chemotherapy treatment right now, but Liza, if you have favorite tips for going through chemo. And similarly, a question came in for you, Liza, that what advice would you give to women who may have just been diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer?
Those are two hard ones, but I will do my best.
There's a $40 copay for this one, I think.
Yeah, so I'm sorry to hear that. So going through chemotherapy, I mean, one thing I've actually just said in the process of doing a little like online, I don't know, it's a weird interview thing where they send you the questions written and you write the answers. And one of the things is 5 tips for beating cancer. And actually, I think I said, I think it's more important to figure out how to cope with cancer. Because there's only so much control you have over the beating part of it, but the coping you do have control over and makes a huge difference and can affect the, you're beating it, quite honestly. So I think it's, one thing I found sort of generally was that for me anyway, going ahead with my life, doing the things that I mean, sort of back to talking about jobs. I mean, if your job is something you enjoy, then, go for it. I mean, you try not to, I think, change your life too much if you can. And again, obviously people are different levels of reactions and that type of thing, but, I found that to be important. For me, chemotherapy was actually kind of a special day. Now, in those days, I couldn't get emails on my phone. So maybe one of the answers is turn your phone off. But it was for me actually kind of a day of quiet. And I tried to take advantage of that. I gave myself a break. I read a book, I watched stupid things on television. I did crosswords. And I think, maybe that's not your whole day, but I think making it a day that's not just about doing something difficult, but is, you save yourself some treats for that day. So it's something you look forward to, at least in a little way. I mean, there are probably a lot of things, but
I've never had chemo.
I know. I'm just trying to, but you've read the book. And then,
the triple negative.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. Can you just repeat the question for you? What
just advice to somebody just got diagnosed, right?
Yeah.
Advice for someone who has been diagnosed with it. And that's actually another similar question has come in since we started talking, that somebody who's here tonight does have a sibling who's been diagnosed with it. So just sort of advice for the beginning of chemo and then the end, and kind of what advice you would share.
Yeah, well, so I think, I think at first it's really important to find somebody in your life that, whatever cancer you have, that is a support for you. And I think, can attend doctor's appointments particularly. I think really it's hard to do cancer by yourself. I mean, back to sort of Ben's question about resources and things like that. You can't sit there and take notes. You can't remember what the doctor said. So I think that for me, as I say, in general is really important. Triple negative, the research on triple negative has really changed a lot. And I think the progress on it has changed a lot since I was diagnosed in 2006. So I think, making sure that you're seeing somebody who's up to date, hopefully, or getting a second opinion from somebody, not to tout academic institutions, but that is where the specialists and people who are really up on the research are. So I think it's good. You don't have to be treated there. And frequently, I know John will provide advice to a community oncologist, see somebody and suggest things, but then you can be treated in your own your own practice?
This is not responsive really to the question, so I apologize to the person who asked it, but you pointed out that, there's a beginning and an end to the treatment, and then you cross your fingers. That's sort of the standard way with a lot of breast cancers, because we still, 90% of breast cancer patients live 5 years or more, even the bad kinds. So they've made incredible success. The kinds of cancer Ben and I take care of, we're happy at a year. We're happy at 18 months. And, you've heard where you ring these bells after you finish your chemotherapy. Well, there are a lot of people, breast cancer and others, that never get to ring that bell. And part of the book is about this, is my own personal struggle against the success, not against, jealous of the breast cancer success, because of the funding, because of the awareness, because of research is drawn to the money, and then benefiting from the science, benefiting from their success at the same time. But then I think both of us turning back to, all right, what about everybody else? How do we, because most people don't get breast cancer, they get some other kind of cancer. And so how do we take all of this attention and focus of this big pink ribbon and make sure that we're not leaving other cancers behind as well? So I at least try and put some balance in that, because those are the thoughts that were going through my head as I was going through a lot of this.
And for completeness, colon cancer month is March. I believe it covers blue, not brown.
Right, the ribbon.
And pancreas is purple in June, I think.
Yep.
Okay. So just to get that out there for completeness. Other questions?
We'll mark the calendar for sure. This question came in actually from somebody who is a husband of a former patient of yours, John. But John, you treated my wife and occasionally expressed your displeasure at her and possibly my reaction to your advice or impatience. Did you ever have that experience as a patient, and how did you respond?
He's impatient with me all the
time.
time. It's not just you.
Haven't you figured that out from this hour together? Well, whoever that is, I'm sorry. Well, I mean, I try to be honest with it is a service industry on one level, but you're paying us to try and coach you and give you guidance and leadership in a very difficult situation. And, we have the advantage of having traveled the route sometimes before, and have a different level of vision often on that. So, and there are times when we're just busy. And so instead of stopping and talking it through, sometimes even charming people like me can get short, right? And say, we can't do that now. So we are human. Part of what I talk about in the book is that in those white coats on the other side of the door, we're commiserating with each other, right? So we're having to regroup, recharge, and prepare for the clinic ahead. Tomorrow, I have 9 patients in clinic tomorrow. I've already reviewed their charts. I know where the one bad scan is. There's a bad scan tomorrow, and I prepped for that. I've got a plan in mind. So I've been thinking about that for a couple of days in advance of a bad moment I'm going to have. The person sport moment's worse than mine, but it's still going to be not an easy thing to do. I'm not looking forward to walking in that room, and that costs our team. It costs the doctor who has to deliver that. We're not cold in person, and particularly true in oncology. We go into this because we want to be there, and we want to be with you, and we want to be in your shirt and in your heart and in your soul. But when we do that, while it might make us a better doctor, at that moment, it's going to cost us. And that's sort of back to Ben's burnout. You can't sustain that nonstop every day, year after year, decade after decade, without it costing.
Well, I will just say too that my oncologist, I think, and when I say this, I'm not exaggerating. I think she worked from basically 6 a.m. until midnight every day. I worried, and most of my greatest concern to me was she had a dog. I have no idea how this dog did not go to the bathroom for whatever when she was at work. But anyway, But I, and while that
You
was.
did die of kidney failure. Now
Yeah.
that you're saying it.
While, as a patient, that was, it was very comforting to know that she was there all the time. I did worry about her. And I mean, again, I lived with an oncologist, so I could probably imagine a little more what was going, the other side of her life, or the fact that she obviously didn't really have one. I mean, she didn't really have much. I mean, she's a wonderful person, but I think she would, again, I'm going to say that she really didn't have a social life. And we talk about one of the reasons we wrote this book is that we hope we do give people an insight into the various components of people involved with cancer, the patient, the caregiver, the oncologist, and all the people. Honestly, it's not just the oncologists, it's all the people who work. I mean, we can't give the personal account, but still, that we all, by seeing that, will be able to understand what other, how afraid patients are, and how and what oncologists are trying to do to alleviate that pain, while also keeping their own mental health too.
Well, one of Liza's themes of the book, and it's actually something we learned at our brief 4 years at Sidwell Parents, is this concept of grace, and of forgiving each other our shortcomings, and knowing that our heart's in the right place, but trying as hard as we can try at that moment. And that's true of the patient, trying, and the caregiver, and everybody who's involved is trying their hardest. And if the more of that we can recognize, and maybe that's a life lesson, and certainly, but we could all take a little bit of that into any aspect of our lives. But that's certainly something that we hope when folks read the book will get a sense that that's an important component to being happy.
Can I ask one final question before we close out? And Ben, this came from your lovely wife. Here's a question. Looking back, do you have regrets in your journey through cancer?
That's a good question.
Good question.
I wanted to be a dermatologist, but I couldn't. I know I'm teasing. But for our cancer journey, I see you there nodding. So, well, it's hard to know. You make decisions and you live with them. I mean, for me, at least.
Yeah, no, I think we both kind of approach life that way. I mean, a little bit of, and, I mean, as I say, guessing and talking about, I had extra doses of drugs,
We do have one. I just thought of it.
Oh, good. We have a regret.
So one thing we learned that we didn't really know about at the time was that our children, we thought we were great parents, and we did the debrief early on and told them what was going on. And
well, when John says debrief, honestly, we had one conversation with him the day I was diagnosed. And then we didn't avoid talking about it. It just didn't come up again. So I would say we never really debriefed. We just said, Mom has breast cancer. Here's what's going to happen. And that was the end.
And then when we didn't die, then they read the book, right? So now they're reading the book as adults. And they're like needing therapy now, because they were like, oh my God, we didn't know what was going on. So, that it's a new piece of advice we learned looking back is this idea of checking in with those you love as you know more, and as you've gone through, as you get better and better and out of the woods, on the edge of the woods, then out of the woods, that you let your loved ones know that that's where you are.
Well, I think that was a wonderful place to close our conversation. I can't thank you all enough. I want to give you guys an opportunity to say any last words, and Ben as well. If there's anything else you would want to share to close out.
No, this was great. Let's do it again.
Talking about cancer. I just want to say thank you all for being part of this, and honestly being part of the Sidwell community. It really, for us, was such a wonderful 4 years. And I think, Emma really loved it. And we've all, as John says, not only taken away relationships from it, but also life lessons that have really continued to teach us and to help us with our own lives. So and thank you, Anna and Ben, for organizing and moderating.
I can't think of a smarter audience and more caring about each other and humanity than this audience. And so for you guys to spend an hour with us talking about this is a real treat. So we appreciate it very much.
Well, we appreciate your time being here. Thank you so much, not only to you three for being here, but to all of our guests for being here tonight. These events are nothing without all of the community members who come and join. So thank you for being here. John and Liza, thank you for sharing so candidly and thoughtfully, and Ben for leading us through this conversation. We really appreciate you all taking the time to be here and share with the Sidwell Friends community. The book, as you all know, is Off Our Chests, a candid tour through the world of cancer. There it is right there. And if you're curious to hear a little more from John and Liza and you happen to be free on September 24th, I'm going to share my screen here so you all can see a little flyer. They will be out at Revelation Vineyards in Madison, Virginia, with another Sidwell Friends parent of alum family, Francoise and Julian Moisevich, who are the owners of Revelation Vineyards. So this is the Literary Council of Madison County is doing a conversation and a fundraiser that's going to feature John and Liza. So if you happen to want to go out there to the beautiful Madison County countryside and drink some delicious wine and also support great cause and hear from these two again, we'll be happy to share that information around with everybody. We have more Conversation with Friends events coming up. Our next one is actually not until November 9th, but that's going to be a talk about the future of US elections featuring 5 different alumni panelists. And there will be more coming down the pike. If you have an idea or a thought about a future Conversation with Friends, we would love to hear it. This one came up because Ben gave me a call and said, we should really talk about these guys' book. It's fantastic. So please, please, please share your thoughts and ideas with us. Throw a classmate under the bus who's doing cool stuff and you want to see featured, and you might just be in the running. And without further ado, thank you. We appreciate you. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we'll see you very soon.
Thank you.